Hi, back on February 15th, 2011, we had an EEVBlog World Exclusive where I reviewed the Agilent 2000 and 3000 X Series scopes, and it was a bit of a red letter day in the oscilloscope market because these things really stepped the industry up in terms of price per performance, what you can get in the low to mid-range market. And that brings us to today. Well, we've got another EEVBlog World Exclusive, and if you just bought a 3000 series, well, they've just released the 4000 X series. Here it is. It's bigger, it's sexier, smells just as good, and yes, it's touchscreen. And no, this is not designed to replace the 3000 X series. So if you just bought one, don't worry. This is a new higher performance, higher priced model. So they've got it standardizing along the range, 2000X, 3000X, and now 4000X. And if it looks familiar to you, it should, because it is essentially identical to the 7000 series. It's the same 7000 series case, but they've just whacked the 3000 electronics in there. And yes, it's got the Mega Zoom 4 ASIC. So let's take a look at what this puppy has to offer. We will take a look at the differences between these, because this will not be a full review, because I've already done a full review of the 3000 X series, and because they're based on essentially identical hardware, I'll only take a look at the significant differences you get in this new 4000 X series model. Now, Agilent need to be a little bit careful when they base this new scope on the same hardware as the 3000 series, because they've already copped a bit of flack on the differences between the 2000 and the 3000 series and how they're based on the same hardware. Well, this one again is essentially based on exactly the same hardware, apart from the analog front ends, that you get in the 2000 series scope. But there's a huge price difference. You jump up from the 2000, 3000, and now 4000. Does it offer enough value for money to warrant it over the 3000? We'll find out. Now, one of the major differences, as you can see, much bigger screen. This one's a 12-inch 800 by 600 display compared to the 8.5-inch 800 by 480 display on the 3000 X series. Now, I'm pretty disappointed in this actually. I expected this big 12-inch screen to have greater resolution than 800 by 600, but that's what the spec sheet says it's got. But anyway, it is definitely a usable difference in the scopes, and this one seems to be a bit brighter as well than the 3000 X series. And you'll notice that because it's 800 by 600, the divisions on there are now square as opposed to sort of rectangular on the 3000 X series. So they've sort of expanded it out like that, and it is a much better, nicer, sexier, usable display. So yeah, thumbs up there, but a bit disappointed with the resolution. And the 4000 X, like the 3000, comes in both 2-channel and 4-channel versions. Just be careful, if you're buying the 2-channel version up front, you can't expand it to the 4-channel version later, just like on the 3000 series. So if you need the 4 channels, buy it up front. Now, bandwidth wise, the 3000 was 100 megahertz to 1 gigahertz. Options, the 4000 X series starts at 200, which is the one we've got here. This is the MSOX 4024A, so it's sort of like the bottom of the range unit here, but it does have the 16-channel logic analyzer as well. And the bandwidth on this can go up to 1.5 gig. But like the 3000 X series, you can only upgrade the bandwidth within a very limited range as a software license. So you can go from the 200 to the 350 megahertz one as a software license, but you cannot jump from the 350 megahertz to the 500 megahertz one as a software license. You've got to send it back to the factory, and that's the same with the 3000 X series. It's a physically different analog front end. And likewise, you can't go from 500 megahertz one if you bought it up to 1 gig or 1.5. You've got to send it back to the factory, and they've got to change the board in it. Same thing with this. If you want to go from 500 to 1 gig, you've got to send it back to the factory. So just be aware of that. It would have been nicer if you could software upgrade from 200 megahertz to 1.5 gig, but 1.5 gig analog front end is massively expensive, so they can't put that in the base 200 megahertz model. And You can't even software upgrade from 1 gig to 1.5 gig. You got to send it back to the factory as well. Bummer. But analog front ends are still expensive. The 4000 series has a 5 gig sample per second sample rate across all the models, even on the 200 megahertz one, whereas the 3000X series was 4 gig samples per second and 5 gig samples only on the 1 gigahertz model. Now you might think, why bother having 5 gig samples per second on a 200 megahertz scope? Because if you're using sine X on X interpolation, for example, which these scopes are capable of doing, any good scope is capable of doing these days, you only need 4 times the input bandwidth in theory. Aha! But as you know, when you switch on that second channel there, it halves the sample rate as well. The 4000 is no different, exactly the same architecture as the 3000 in that respect, but where that extra sample rate comes in handy is for the high resolution mode, that 12-bit high resolution mode for the analog front end. It's exactly the same as the 3000X series, and that can take advantage of that higher sample rate as it does boxcar averaging of those samples in real time, and that's where you need much greater than that 4 times sample rate. So that is, that is a good decision to put 5 gig samples per second on a 200 megahertz scope. I like it. Other differences are 4 meg sample memory standard. This one only came with 2 meg memory standard, so none of that memory upgrade garbage. So it's based on the same MegaZoom 4 ASIC, so they've just enabled the full 4 meg sample memory across all the models. Now it's exactly the same update speed because it's the same ASIC, 1 million waveforms per second, and we'll check that of course. This one has not 1 but 2 arbitrary waveform generators in it, and it still uses the same MegaZoom 4 ASIC. How do they do it? Well, this one had dual arbitrary waveform generators built in all along. They only had the 1 connector on the front. It had 2 because the 2 demo connectors here had to generate those demo signals, and they actually used the dual channel built-in arbitrary waveform generator to do that. So this thing had it all along, but they only decided to put in 1. So you've got to wonder, did they sort of have this 4000 series in mind when they designed this thing, and they went, oh, I only put 1, and maybe in a future one we'll put 2. And well, anyway, either way, they've gone and done it. But the 4000X series comes standard, with a few things which were optional extra on the 3000X series. One is the segmented memory option, and the advanced waveform math is built in as well, and it's also got the built-in LAN and VGA video output, whereas that was a separate module on the 3000X series. Mixed signal 16-channel logic analyzer, exactly the same, but it's also optional extra. You can upgrade that later, pay extra later if you don't want it up front, and they'll send you the cable and the license. But all the other software options available in this thing in terms of serial protocol decode and all that sort of stuff is exactly the same as the 3000X series, with one exception. The 4000X series does USB 2.0 serial decode. But one of the major differences, which is one of the big selling points of this new scope, is that it is touchscreen. It's got all your traditional knobs there, so it doesn't really piss you off. I rather like it, but we'll go into that in more detail. And along with the touchscreen capability is a new trigger option called zone triggering, and we'll take a look at this in detail as well. The main selling point of this thing is the bigger display, the zone triggering, and the touchscreen capability, and the dual waveform generator. Apart from that, it's a 3000X series. So I've got to say, I was initially a bit disappointed. I expected a bit more for an upgraded series in terms of performance. Yeah, it's got some usability differences, but does it offer more performance in terms of waveform updates per second? No. Does it offer anything better in terms of memory depth, which is one of the key factors of an oscilloscope? No, it doesn't. It's still that 4 meg sample memory, and that does seem quite low, but it does have segmented memory capability, but that's not quite as good as, say, the new segmented capability in the new Rigol scopes, for example. It's not as flexible. So 4 meg is nice, but I expected something to, a big step up, especially because this used the 7000 series case, and the 7000 series scope is 8 meg points memory, so it's double. But they're limited. But the reason they're limited is because it's based on the same Megazoom 4 ASIC, and to get the million waveform updates per second, the fastest in the industry, it's still unbeatable, right? It's still an order of magnitude better than anything else on the market in that respect. It is limited to that chipset, which has the 4 meg sample memory built in. That's how they get the speed. So maybe expected, at least if they were going to use the same chipset, maybe they could have used one per channel instead of sharing one Megazoom ASIC across there and have some Oscilloscope or something that had Megazoom 4 ASIC per channel plus dual arbitrary waveform per channel. Oh, that would have been awesome, but probably would have cost a fortune. And let's see the boot up time difference. It should be identical, same operating system, everything. So boom, here we go. And do they flash up at the same time? Self-test. Let's have a look. No, the 3000X series popped up first. So it looks like this self-test takes a bit longer. There we go, lovely mountain, look at that, I like it. It's taking longer to boot up, so it's got to do extra stuff, presumably. I don't mind this 7000 series. Form factor, it is quite, it's quite sexy. I rather like it. It is very thin, check it out. Not a problem whatsoever there. 4 channels are still identical. They've still got the dual channel demo output, so they've got those cool demo signals which are very useful. They've added one extra USB port on the front here, and they've added the dual arbitrary waveform gen out, and they've added the external trigger input as well, which is excellent. It's on the front. The other one was on the back, which was a bit annoying. But of course that means they had to move the 16 channel digital input mixed signal capability around to the back here, and that's what they've done. There's the digital input, exactly the same cable as before, exactly the same option. They've integrated the SVGA out. As I said, we've got another USB host and USB device, and they've got LAN built in as well, whereas that was a plug-in. LAN and VGA was a plug-in optional extra before. One thing it doesn't have is GPIB. Now apparently there is a GPIB option for it, but there's doesn't appear to be any slot or anywhere to plug that option into. So maybe they've got a USB to GPIB option or something. Now they've got the same trigger out as they had before, which is useful. We'll be using that today to check out the update rate of this scope. And the one thing they've added over the 3000X series is a 10 megahertz reference output, presumably input and output. So although I like this case and its form factor, one thing they've dropped was the hidden probe compartment on the top. You'd flip the lid open, you can keep your probes in there and your accessories. That was rather useful. Bummer. They've got an absolutely identical fan. Does seem a little bit quieter, perhaps. I don't know. There's not much in it, but this isn't a particularly noisy scope. One thing I really like, the carry strap on top of this. Good old-fashioned carry strap. Beautiful. Where's my scope gone? Anyone see my scope? Bastards. They've made a small change to a couple of the buttons here, run, stop, single, and the channel buttons. They did light up exactly like these WaveGen and these zone buttons. They were completely clear buttons and they lit up the whole thing, but now they're just little pokey sort of, I don't really like it much, but just having a whinge. As I said, one of the things I don't like is that they've gone from the XGA display 1024 by 768 on the 7000 series down to 800 by 600 on the 4000 series, and you're losing visible waveform area because of the Megazoom 4 ASIC. So just like the 2000 and 3000 series, you can't collapse this menu to get a bigger usable window. That is an inherent disadvantage with the Megazoom 4 ASIC and the price you pay for that 1 million waveform updates per second, because that ASIC needs to write to a designated area on the screen, so you can't just change that willy-nilly. It's a bit disappointing, but I do like the 1 million waveform updates per second. And the good news is, if you're used to and like the 2000 and 3000 X series, the 4000 is exactly the same. Although the keypad layout is a little bit different because it's to match the 7000 series, all the functionality, all the menu systems, all exactly the same. So I won't go through all the options and all the various things. If you want that, look at the Agilent 3000 review. I'll link it in down below. It's exactly the same. So you go into the acquire menu and it's all exactly the same. They've changed a little bit of the look on it on the screen, and now of course it's a touch screen as well, so you can do it using touch screen or do it using the traditional buttons. And I know I heard everyone groan when I mentioned this thing's a touch screen. I groaned too. I went, oh, bloody touch screen. Oh, give me a break. They're going to ruin this thing. Well, actually, they haven't. I'm pleasantly surprised by this thing because, look, it's got this magic touch button here. If you get frustrated that, you know, oh, I accidentally, you know, touched the screen and did something, oh, bloody annoying, just kill, die, you mongrel. And it's no longer a touch scope. It works exactly using your traditional menu buttons, no problem whatsoever. But if you do want that touch capability, switch it on for a second, draw your little window like this to set up your touch zone trigger and all that sort of jazz, and Bob's your uncle. So it really caters for both. Take a look up here, this little Agilent Spark it's called. I didn't actually know that, but it's called the Agilent Spark symbol. There's a spark symbol up here, and you've got this drop down menu, so they cater for the Windows fanatics. Oh, I love my drop down menu, I want to use that thing. So you can go in there, and there is nothing available in here that you can't do with your traditional menus and everything else. It's just yet another way to do it. So instead of pushing the button, oh, I'm going to go up there, I'm going to go run stop, because I like using Windows, duh. Although it does run Windows CE, it's got the Windows CE sticker on the back, runs the embedded Windows OS, just like the 2000 and 3000 X series as well. It is not a Windows interface. You can't run Windows apps, you can't get to the Windows desktop, none of that. They've just added, this is Agilent's own little frills that they've added to the screen here. So don't worry, this is not a Windows scope. It works like a real scope. So let's start to look at some of the features that this touchscreen offers. Let's first of all take a look at this new zone triggering capability, because this is one of the huge selling points. Now, I'm running the zone trigger demo here just because it's very convenient. I could set up my own waveform, but this example one is quite good. Now, we've got, you know, just a regular waveform here. It's on channel 1, no big deal, right? Regular digital waveform, and you might zoom in and you might notice that there's this occasional little glitch in there, and you might turn up your intensity and go, oh, look at that. Look at that, there's something going on there. There's funny business, you see it over here as well. Being able to trigger off that particular point would ordinarily be, you know, not an easy task to do at all. I mean, you move your trigger up here and it's just flipped it around to here, and, you know, that won't allow you to single shot capture that thing. I mean, if we just go a single shot mode and then just go bang, 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 we're never going to capture that. Or we might eventually if we can see something on the screen like that. So let's try and trigger on that. So let's draw a little window around there, and it pops up with these rather convoluted at first options. It's got two different zones you can set up. So you can set up a scenario like an and or type scenario between the zones. So we're only interested if zone 1 intersects. Zone 1 must intersect. So the waveform must intersect somewhere within inside that window for the trigger to happen. So let's go must intersect like that, and bingo, we are now triggering on that particular point right there. So if we can now single shot capture that, we can go into single shot mode, bang. You see how it waited a while there. I'm going to single shot, I press single shot, and we're waiting a bit because it doesn't happen very often, but it eventually will happen. Hello, McFly, there it is. Bang, because it eventually went through that particular trigger point there. Beautiful. I love this zone trigger capability. It's really neat. And then of course if we draw a second zone, say, I don't know, over here somewhere like this, and we say zone 2 must intersect, so now it's got to go through both zones in order to intersect, so we'll find that that now won't trigger. But if you had some complicated, convoluted thing, you know, bastard of a problem you're trying to trigger off, then, well, having two zones there might be useful. I like it. And we can go, well, it doesn't need to go through that zone there. It must not intersect through that zone. And you see how I'm, there we go, it's triggered. So it's now excluding that zone there. This is really powerful. And the other good thing about it is that you can expand the time base like that and zoom right out and then draw it, say, all the way over here, must intersect, and it still keeps zone 1 right off the screen all the way over here like that. So you can put those zones anywhere within the waveform window, not just on screen. Now the other thing that the touch screen is useful for, check out this up here. At the moment we're in select mode, but we can also do waveform drag mode like that. And we can just drag that waveform along. So if we single shot capture that, we can just drag it with our finger, just like you do on a tablet. That's, you know, it's actually quite intuitive. I know it seems like a bit of a wank factor, but I actually rather like it. I think it's quite neat. But unfortunately, no, you can't do the two-finger pinch and zoom thing. Sorry. And the fun doesn't end there, folks, either. Check this out. I can take this ground symbol here for channel 1. Here it is. I can just move that waveform up and down. Beautiful. And yes, the trigger point. You can also drag the trigger point up and down. Fantastic and quite useful, but that's only good if you like to touch things. If you're a knob man, no problem. Just play around with your knobs. You can use this scope exactly like an ordinary scope. You don't have to touch this thing at all. And there's the magic bugger off button. Beautiful. You can pop up the menu like this and you can select 50 ohms, 1 meg, and then you can select the help as well. That's what the blue there is for. So bingo, the help will pop up on that. You can get rid of that and you can kill that thing there. So it's not too bad at all. I don't mind it. So it's almost to the point where anything you can see on the screen is touchable. I mean, channel 1, you want to muck around with channel 1, that brings up the channel 1 menu, brings up the channel 2 menu, brings up the horizontal menu, trigger menu. There's a whole bunch of these side panels here which you can also call up. Let's call up our DVM function, for example. There's our digital voltmeter. They claim, you know, this is one of the major 5 instruments in one feature. It's not that great, but what you can do is you can drag it over to here and bingo, you've got your little DVM panel and you can put it anywhere you like. And you can do the same thing with other stuff. If you've got, say, your cursor menu like that, you can whack your cursor information anywhere you like, and you can put as many of those anywhere on the screen as you like. There's one thing I do find a little bit annoying is I've got the touch mode here completely turned off, so I can't touch anything at all anymore. But let's say I push the vertical button here, it still pops up with the same window to tell me that I'm going into or out of fine mode with the same look, and it eventually vanishes, of course. But you know, it's just, I think if you turn off that touch, I don't want any of this window crap popping up. And yes, you can even drag the cursors around as well. Well, not only can we scroll through the waveform like that, but then the cursor stays here, it doesn't go off the screen, so you can just grab it and bring it back in like that. That really is quite neat. And same for the vertical scale there. The Y stays there as well, and you can just drag it up and down. Beautiful. That really, the usability of this thing, you might think, yeah, this touch thing's a bit of a gimmick, but no, it's actually quite neat. And one of the good things with these panels that you can move around like this, if you think that they're obscuring the info, you can actually set those to transparent. Excellent. And just like the 3000, yes, it still has the issue with the frequency measurement is taken from the display data and not from the full memory data. So you can see it's got 4 digits there and it's matching down here, but you see it drops down a digit as we go up in the time base and was dropped down again, it still stays the hardware frequency counter down here. So that one's still a hardware counter, but as you can see, it does eventually drop down. So these measurement cursors only display what's on the screen. So you've got two wave gen buttons here, you've got two outputs down the bottom here, and it's exactly the same. You've got the same selection of waveforms down there. And by the way, I don't have to scroll through there. I can just touch that and of course go to sine, cardinal or something like that, and it's the same, you know, frequency and amplitude. Instead of just ramping up the frequency with the knob, which is, you know, it's okay. I like the velocity factors they've got set there and everything. It works quite well, but with the touchscreen, you now have on-screen keyboard for all these things that before were, you know, kind of annoying to enter. 3.14159 megahertz, not a problem at all. There it is, beautiful. They've added one extra menu option here, dual channel, and that gives you the ability to track frequency, amplitude, offset and duty cycle, or a combination of those between the two channels if you desire. Now they have decided to add one nice capability to the ARB Gen that was missing on the 3000 series, is modulation capability. Now, although it still doesn't have external modulation capability, it does have internal. We can get the different types, AM, FM and FSK modulation. Neat. And we can do sine, square or ramp for the modulation, frequency and the depth as well. Neat. I like it. So that was a big capability that was missing on the Agilent 3000. So for some people that might be a nice little sweetener to not only get the dual channel ARB capability but get modulation as well. But the 3000 series scope wasn't completely devoid of modulation. You could actually hook it up to the PC and do modulation through the software, I believe, in a certain limited respect. So it was actually capable of it, but now they've got it built in. And bingo, we have our nice amplitude modulated sine wave. Beautiful. And as with the 3000X, it's got all these training signals, which, as I've mentioned before, are not only good for teaching and stuff like that, but good for general use as well. If you are trying to trigger on something that you haven't triggered on for a long time and it's complicated to set up, then you can actually generate the signal using the ARB Gen on these demo outputs here, and you can then set up your trigger on your scope for your real signal using the simulated one on here. And it's quite neat, and it still has, you know, the list of all these different training signals that you can generate. One thing missing though from the serial capability of this thing, like on the 3000X series as well, is no JTAG. Don't know why. This seems to be quite across most scopes on the market, I think. JTAG seems to be one ominous omission from all of these scopes. I don't know why. This really is one of the killer apps, so to speak, for want of a better term, for these X series scopes compared to others on the market that don't have these the ARB Gen built in with the training signal. You know, it's like having a complete demo board with you built into the scope at all times. We captured 3 runt pulses there just with single shot, but if you had an issue with real runt pulses, then you could figure out how to set up the trigger properly to actually, you know, to do that in the real world. And let's have a look at the zoom capability here. If we want to zoom into that, go into window mode there, let's look at that little runt pulse down in there, zoom horizontal, waveform horizontal zoom there, bang, you can undo it at any time and it goes back to where you were. So if you're accidentally poking the screen like I do, I'm a bit of a poker at things, then it's annoying, you know, you mess something up, you can always go back. Now let's have a look at the probes which you get with this thing, and I really quite like them. Here's the old, well, the old 3000X series ones. These new ones are 700 megahertz, folks. Brilliant for a passive probe, fixed 10:1 of course. And I got these 700 megahertz probes even with the 200 megahertz scope. So it looks like they're offering those standard across the entire range, and they are much smaller and more compact, and especially the tip on it is really quite nice. So it is physically a smaller probe to really get into those tight places. It feels really high quality. I like it. I'm not sure I like the new insulated alligator clip on it. Kind of prefer these, even though they can be a bit annoying and short things out. I don't know if I like this particular type. It'd be nice if they offered both, especially in this sort of price range. But that probe, folks, that is sex on a stick right there. Really beautiful fine point on that. I love it. And it comes standard with an alignment tool, of course, and your low inductance ground point spare probe tips as well. Fantastic. And there's one thing that the tight asses didn't provide with these new lovely 700 megahertz probes that they did on the 3000 is a probe to BNC adapter. Bummer. And of course you'll get your bag of obligatory identifier rings to put on your probe, and they match the colours on the front of the scope as well as the waveforms on the screen. And the probes are, ta-da, made in Germany. Fantastic. Hi to all my German viewers. I love it. Not everything is made in the Agilent's Malaysian manufacturing plant. Oh, German. You can smell the quality. And yes, even if you buy the 1.5 gig model of the 4000 series, you will get the 700 megahertz probes, because this is as far as passive probe technologies go. I think there might be one or two on the market that go to a gig, but really most of them go to 500 megahertz. So they've done well to get a passive probe up to 700 megahertz, really. So if you want to go higher than that 700 megahertz passive probe, you've got to shell out at least 4 figures and get one of these 2 gig active probes. Now, one thing I'm not really sure about are these really weird ass looking tilting feet on this thing. I mean, I kind of preferred the little flip out feet on the front of the 2000 and 3000 series. You know, you just lift it up like that and flip them out, and you've got some extra angle on your scope. But this thing, you've got to go, whoa, and almost flip it over on its face, and look at that. But once it's there, I mean, you know, it's pretty darn good. I mean, there's no problem at all punching these buttons and having this sucker fall over. But if anything, it's a little, you know, if you move it a little bit forward, whee! It's got rubber at the back here. It doesn't have rubber on the front. But I do know why they've done it, because this thing is quite tall vertically like this. So I guess they've had to add that so it extends the arm right out there and just ensures that the thing doesn't fall over. So I know where they're coming from. It's a limitation of this slim form factor. Now, one thing they have changed / improved on this GUI layout is because they've got more vertical screen resolution now, they've got a bigger info strip along the top of the screen now, and they've able to add extra information in there. 500 millivolts with a slash, so that's per division there, but they've also got 1.35600 volts. And you might ask, well, what is that? It wasn't actually immediately obvious. So that's actually the 0 point relative to the center of the screen like that. So we'll move channel 1 up and down. So that's telling you how far it's offset from the center. Whether or not that's useful or a tad confusing, I don't know. Make up your own mind. And with the horizontal here, they've got 100 nanoseconds and then the slash. So that's your traditional horizontal per division, and then under it we've got 2.00 microseconds. If we press our button here if we center our delay, so that's our delay offset right there. And once again, it's exactly the same font. I probably would have preferred like both the vertical one here, that top one, to be, because that's your main one, maybe that bigger or highlighted or bold or something like that, just to separate it from the figure below it. And I thought we'd just do a quick test of the waveform update rate. I've done this before on the 3000, I think, in a previous video, but we'll do it again. So what I've got is this coax here coming on the trigger output from the 4000 series scope. I'm just feeding in a 1 megahertz sine wave here. That's the key, same as or higher than the anticipated update rate of the scope. In this case, 1 meg samples per second, 1 megahertz. Let's have a look at, on the 3000 series scope, at that trigger output waveform. At 20 nanoseconds per division and higher, it can jump up to 1 meg, but at 50 nanoseconds, it looks like it's going to drop to 500, and so 500 meg samples per second, then 250 by the looks of it, then 125, and so forth. It will drop down as your time base decreases. And even when we turn on processing like our FFT, for example, I mean, don't worry about what we're getting there. We're still getting 1 million waveform updates per second. Fantastic. And that's probably all I can show you with this new 4000 series scope, because it is basically a 3000 series scope, and there may be a couple of extra things in here I missed. I've only been playing with this for a short amount of time. I believe it's the only one in the country at the moment, so yeah, I was pretty lucky to get this. Now, if you want to see the full capabilities of this thing, you should watch the 3000X series review, because this thing is essentially a 3000X with a few extra bells and whistles, and that'll be linked in below. So the verdict on the new Agilent 4000X series scope, well, of course, it's very nice, it's very sexy, and yeah, of course it gets a thumbs up, but I don't know, I just can't help feeling pretty underwhelmed with it. I expected more, really. I thought, I almost hate to say it, but I think the Mega Zoom 4 ASIC in this thing is almost cramping its style. It's almost limiting this thing. I mean, it was great in the 3000X series, but then, well, yeah, the 4000X has got some nice stuff. I mean, the screen is really nice, okay, but it should be higher res for the extra money, and the size of it, quite frankly, it's a little bit too small. Yes, the touchscreen stuff, fantastic. They've got that right. The usability, yeah, there's other touchscreen scopes on the market, but this one works really well. I like it. It's you know, if you don't like it, switch it off, or if you do like it, you've got some extra capability. Really quite neat. But the zone triggering, fantastic. I like it. Big winner there. Dual ARB, fantastic. They've added the modulation stuff, brilliant. But apart from that, that's all you get. I mean, it's going to be a useful upgrade for some people, but I don't know. I was just hoping for more, maybe a new Mega Zoom 5 ASIC with some extra memory or something like that tacked on, but or some better segmented memory capability to match some of the stuff Rygal's doing these days. But gee, I don't know. Just expected more. A bit let down. Oh. But of course, it is a great scope if you can afford it. And therein lies the rub, folks. I've got some prices here. Now, these are Australian prices. I don't have the US prices at the moment, but they should be pretty much on par, given the really super strong Aussie battler at the moment. So here we go. It starts at $6,046 Australian and goes up to $20,730. So that's from the 200 megahertz 2-channel version up to the 1.5 gig 4-channel version. And well, geez, $6,000 for the 2-channel entry level thing. Oh, gee, I don't know. Let's compare apples and apples a bit more, shall we? Let's take the 200 megahertz 4-channel version of the 4000 series. This one is $7,557 for the 4-channel 200 megahertz one, as you see it here, with no ARB. With the 3000 series scope, they're actually throwing in ARB for free at the moment. Brilliant. That's like an $800 option for nix. So the waveform, the ARB waveform option for this thing, $1,100. It's nice, but you can get dual channel, you know, 20 megahertz plus arbitrary waveform generator for well under $1,000 these days. Sure, it's not an Agilent, but geez, you know, I mean, whew, it's pricey. So really, the an equivalently equipped 3000 with the free waveform ARB gen option is only $4,470. There's a $3,000 difference, basically. You know, when you look down to it, between this 4000 and the 3000 series scope, $3,000 extra. Granted, this thing does have some built-in stuff like the VGA LAN capability, which the 3000 doesn't, and it's also got the 4 meg memory upgrade. But even if you take those and you say, you know, it's still a couple of grand more. So although the scope itself gets a thumbs up, and well, yeah, it has to. It's a cool bit of kit, you can't deny it. but it's a thumb sideways at best as an upgrade to the 3000 series, and in terms of value for money, compared to the 3000 series, it's a thumbs down. Because seriously, the software options for this thing are, some of them are double what they are on the 3000 series scope for exactly the same software option. Are you kidding me? And therein lies one of the major issues with this thing. If you decide to buy into this because of the big screen and the touch zone capability in the dual ARB gen, you're going to get hammered for those software options. So it's going to be a higher cost of ownership, much higher than the 3000 series. I mean, some of the 3000 series, I think I complained in the original review of that they're a little bit pricey, right? Because, well, that's Agilent and that's what they do. This one, So yeah, everyone talks about the software options and how they're a pain in the ass and they're a rip-off and all that sort of thing, but the fact is this is how big companies have to operate so that they can afford to innovate and develop scopes like these X series. I mean, they have to make sufficient margin on the larger end models so that they can afford to offer you cool technology in the lower end models like they did with the 2 and the 3000. But in this case, Agilent's milking this thing for all it's worth. Moo. I can't see how you can justify paying more for this thing, and you may as well get a tricked up 3000 series. But I'm sure some people will like it. Looks really sexy. Still smells nice. I know what you're thinking. Can it survive the EEVBlog drop test? There's only one way to find out. Give it the old toss. Because, you know, you're debugging a circuit or something like that, something's really bugging you, you just want to toss your scope across the room. It's an important test. No scope has been able to survive it yet, but, well, I don't have high hopes for it, but we've got to find out. It's a bit of a shame, really. It's a nice bit of kit. I like this thing, but it's got to be done. I'm a professional reviewer, so don't try this at home, folks. I am a professional. Here we go. Same as all the others. Hopeless. When is somebody going to design a scope that can survive a simple fall from a bench? It's not rocket science. Catch you next time. Now I've got to clean this up. It's the worst part of the job.